You hear about more and more. You see it everywhere. So various government leaders are saying that the price should be put on carbon. CEOs of multinationals are calling for government to put a price on carbon. And carbon pricing is appearing more prominently in mainstream media. So even on Twitter, there are more than 10,000 tweets about carbon pricing. Well, some of them might be mine. Some of them, and it even appears on Instagram. So carbon pricing will be an important theme leading up to the international negotiations, and will certainly continue to do so afterwards. So carbon pricing is having a very important impact on our lives, but what does it mean? And how does it affect our everyday life? So today I'm joined here with Elisa Gilbert from Imperial College, Baptiste Favre from the French Ministry of Ecology, Sustainable Development and Energy, and Jan Willem Beukers from the Dutch utility company Eneco, to give some different perspectives on what carbon pricing means. First, I'll start with a brief introduction of what carbon pricing is. How does it work in practice, and why should you and me, just minding our everyday business, care about carbon pricing? So carbon pricing is a way for governments to incentivize reduction of CO2 and other greenhouse gas emissions. The problem at hand is that if greenhouse gas emissions are not controlled, the current society is free to keep polluting, for example, through burning of coal for heating, or through using petrol for traveling, while the future generations will suffer from the huge cost of climate change. So governments can decide to put a price on carbon, giving it a monetary value. So because now you have to pay for your carbon emissions. It does not only make environmentally sense to take measures, to invest in measures to reduce carbon emissions, but also economically and financially. So, as it will save more money at some point to implement these measures, and then to keep paying for them, then to keep paying for the carbon emissions. So in the end, this should lead to some overall reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. Carbon pricing can also trigger other positive developments, such as increase in low carbon investments, could lead to scaling back fossil fuel development, cleaner production, could increase green jobs and lead to green growth. Greening the tax system, such as shifting the tax burden for polluters to polluters, or spur low carbon innovation. So there are different ways that governments can put a price on carbon. The most straightforward way is through a carbon tax, using the existing tax system. By putting a fixed price on carbon per ton emitted, companies have more certainty on how much they will have to pay if they keep emitting like this. Although it will most likely lead to emission reductions, the amount of emissions reduced will depend on what level the price will be. So, and ultimately, you will not have any certainty of how many emissions reductions will be achieved, because that's in the end up to how companies make decisions. An alternative way to put a price on carbon is through emissions trading. So the benefit of emissions trading is that you have certainty that you will achieve your emission reduction targets. The government sets a maximum limit of how much carbon can be emitted and issues an equivalent of emission permits. So then the emitters can arrange among themselves how they will obey this limit by trading these emission permits. So let's say the company A has very cheap options to reduce the emissions. So then it reduces emissions and can sell its leftover emission permits to company B, who has a shortage. The downside of this is that this emission permit, the price of the emission permit, so that is the carbon price, is dependent on demand and supply, and it continues to vary, making it more difficult for companies to base firm decisions on it. Well, these are the two main forms of carbon pricing. You can also combine them in different ways, and it really depends on the country or the region which form of carbon pricing is the most appropriate. That's why, throughout the world, you also see both forms of carbon pricing being used. So in green you see jurisdictions that use emissions trading or some form of emissions trading, and in blue some form of carbon tax. And in striped areas where both carbon tax and emissions trading is implemented. In yellow, there are also many jurisdictions that are considering implementing some form of carbon pricing. And developments are going really fast, because this map was created in September, and a month later, China officially already announced that it will implement emissions trading from 2017. So in total, there are now 40 national jurisdictions and 23 subnational jurisdictions putting a price on carbon. And this does not even include Manitoba and Ontario, who recently and officially announced that they will implement emissions trading. So penalizing carbon emissions is a growing trend in the world. So how do these carbon pricing systems actually work in practice? Who is actually being charged for the carbon? Well, these are mainly large emitters, such as heavy industry, power plants, airlines, and food distributors. So if these large emitters are being charged, why should you and I, just someone from the general public, care about carbon pricing? Well, let's take power plant as an example. So the power plant is facing a pricing on its carbon emissions. So as carbon cost, it just passes on to the electricity distributor, who then passes on to you, the final consumer, through your electricity bill. So, and this does not even appear on your as a separate line in your electricity bill, so you might not know. But now you know about these carbon prices or carbon costs. You may think, well, wait a minute, I don't want to be paying for these dirty power plants to keep polluting. So you can decide to, for example, change to a renewable power supply. So this way you'll be buying less power, so it will generate less. So the power plant will generate less power and less emissions. So this conscious switch can be quite a powerful tool, especially if everyone does it. But then this is just a simple representation of how carbon pricing would affect us in everyday life. There are many other aspects to it. So first we will have Baptiste Benacer-Faubert to give give some overview, give some insights on what carbon pricing means from a government perspective, followed by Jan-Willem Beukers on what carbon pricing means from a business perspective, and then Elisa Gilbert on what carbon pricing means from a society perspective. So first we will have these presentations, followed by a more interactive.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Baptiste Benacer-Faubert, so I'm an economist at the Ministry of Ecology, Sustainable Development and Energy. My work deals with climate finance and climate negotiation, and today my talk, there are 2 points. Well, yeah, there are 2 points in my talk. First, I will tell you about the passionate story of French carbon tax, and then I will tell you about the not less passionate story of positive carbon pricing instruments. Those instruments are less known, but in fact much more frequently used. So first, the French carbon tax. As you know, it's quite complicated to implement carbon tax domestically. Well, it's even harder at the international level. But in France, the carbon tax is a story with unexpected twists and turns. There has been 2 failures before it worked. In 2000 first, it was the first failure. In 2009, we really thought that we'll have a carbon tax implemented in France. Expert commission was set up under the patronage of the former Prime Minister Michel Rocard, and actually the carbon tax was passed at the Parliament, and it was supposed to be implemented in January 2010, but just before Christmas, in 2009, the judges from the Constitutional Council decided to cancel the bill for constitutional inconsistency. So I won't go into the details of the judgment, but the basic things to keep in mind that there was at that time a clash between the economic approach of carbon pricing and the legal approach. So for constitutional inconsistency, it was cancelled. And then, 3 years later, in 2013, a Green Taxation Committee was set up to study the opportunity to introduce in a constitutional manner a carbon component into the French tax system. And once they find a way, I will explain it just later, to introduce it. It was passed in the Budget Act in 2014, and now we have a carbon tax, and we even have a trajectory set into the law in the form of the very recent Energy Transition Bill passed in last July. We now have a carbon tax with a long-term trajectory till 2030. And so how did we make it? The trick was to introduce the carbon tax within existing tax system. So we find an existing tax on fossil fuels. This tax is called TIC, Taxe Intérieure de Consommation. So in English, maybe it's Consumer Excess Duty, so it's a tax on consumption. And we introduce a carbon component into this existing tax. So how does it work? The first year it was totally neutral for household, because the total amount of the TIC remains stable. So you have in the graph in 2030 the TIC represents 60 cents per liter. In 2040 it was still 60 cents per liter, but there was a carbon component, the green part of the tax, amounting to 7 euros per ton of CO2. And this is this small part, which was neutral at the beginning, that we increased the year after. So in 2015, it was no longer 7 euro per ton, but 14.5 euro per ton. And so you have a gradual increase of this carbon component of this existing tax. So it was constitutional because it builds on an existing tax, but now it's modulated depending on the carbon content of the fossil fuel contained by the product we buy. And while the companies subjected to the European trading system, they, for them the TIC rate remains unchanged, so that because they are already exposed to a pricing. And now, since last summer, we have a trajectory on this tax. So we have 2 points. In 2020, it's supposed to reach 56 euros per ton, and in 2030, 100 euros. What we don't know yet, it's between the 2 dates, what will be the exact trajectory, we don't know yet. It's still to be discussed in next Finance Act. So this is how it works now in France. We have this trajectory and a carbon tax. This tax is expected to generate revenue. In 2016 it's expected to amount 4 billion euros. And with this 4 billion euros, sorry. Oh, never mind. This is the impact of the reform. So when you have a carbon tax, we expect that behavior change, and so you have environmental impact. Actually, the increase of fossil fuel prices make consumption decreases, and 2 sectors are mainly impacted: transport and residential sectors. In 2017, we expect a reduction in CO2 emission of 1 million tons for transport and 2 million tons for residential sectors. Then you can appraise the microeconomic impact. So it's usually when you have a new tax, it has an impact on household budget, and this impact is estimated at 100 euros on average 60 euros for heating energy and 40 for transport energy. And in terms of macroeconomic impact, there is the idea that I don't know if you know the story of the double dividend. You have the first dividend is the environmental dividend. You have a better climate, and macroeconomic dividend. With the revenue of the tax, you can decrease other distortionary tax on labor, on investment, and so you have better growth and better employment. This is the story. Now I won't go into the details, but we have a micro-simulation model to appraise the impact on differentiated households. Because if you live in Paris or if you live in the countryside, if you are a single parent family or a couple with 2 children, well, the same tax has not the same impact. And so it's very important to appraise differentiated impacts than to compensate with a lot of accuracy the households. And this is very important to make it acceptable, the compensation part. And now, the second point of my talk is about the role of positive carbon instruments. So those instruments, actually there are plenty of them because they are much more acceptable. With this instrument, we don't make people pay for their emission, but we reward emission reduction. So it's the carrot part of the carbon policy. For instance, we have a feed-in tariff for renewable energy. So there is a fixed price at which, for instance, EDF in France buy electricity from renewable energy. You have energy saving certificate. You have a bundle of heterogeneous instruments that reward good behavior. We have tax credit on energy-related renovation work, for instance, but all kinds of subsidies. But these subsidies are based on emission reduction. This is what I call the positive carbon pricing instrument. But this is costly because you have to pay for this subsidy. And so we try with colleagues from France Stratégie and the Ministry of Ecology, we try to define the terms of reference of what could be a successful positive carbon pricing instrument. And what is important is to send a strong political signal on the value of mitigation activity and sufficiently high and sufficiently credible to make low carbon investment profitable. The idea is that existing carbon prices are not high enough to trigger the investment, so we have to find a way to send a signal on the value of mitigation activities and reward the good investment that goes going into that direction. So this signal has to be sent right now because of what we all know, the urgency, the climate and economic urgency to trigger a new wave of low carbon investment. It has to be sent without depreciating existing assets because one of the problems of direct carbon pricing is that it depreciates assets, carbon intensive assets, so that they are losers of carbon pricing, and then the losers usually they try to block the policy, and they can be very proactive to block that. So we have to be very cautious with existing assets, but not depreciating too bluntly those assets. It has to mobilize private finance because we all know that the funding of the transition will not come from public budget. Public budget cannot finance every profitable investment. And that's the last point, without relying directly on tight public budget. So mainly the public budget will be mobilized to create a leverage effect on private finance, so mainly by providing public guarantee on low carbon loans and then to mobilize the private finance. And so based on these terms of reference, we try to define the ideal instrument. And so we have a proposal with France Stratégie. If you are interested, I brought some hard copies of this proposal in my bag, so I can distribute it later. And so the idea is to turn mitigation activity into a new asset to finance the transition in Europe. study is focused on Europe. So this is what could be a successful positive pricing instrument. And the good news from this COP21, and it's we already have the first building block to then expand new positive carbon pricing instrument. There is this article, which is not very often commented, but it's still in the text, even the last one released at 3 p.m. Today. Article 116. There is an article that recognizes the social, economic, and environmental economic value of voluntary mitigation action and their co-benefit to adaptation, health, and sustainable development. So, it's not very complicated to understand. The idea is just reducing emission creates value. And based on this value, we can build new instruments that incorporate this value. So just to conclude on the political economy aspect of this type of pricing of instrument, I thought that it can be a very interesting way to reintroduce a discussion on the direct carbon price, because with the positive carbon pricing, you tell people a positive story. Mitigation activities create value, so there is a surplus instead of a burden to share with this story. This positive pricing can be a benchmark to make positive instruments more consistent, because all the subsidy instruments I presented you before, usually they implicitly rely on very heterogeneous carbon pricing, and well, as an economist, we know that heterogeneous carbon price is a source of inefficiency. So here, based on this value, we can make it more consistent. And as and why it is can reintroduce a discussion on carbon price is because this positive price has a cost for public budget. And so there is a strong incentive for the government to implement actual carbon price if they want to make it budget neutral. So you have two different prices, one that rewards emission reduction, and another one that gradually increase and raise revenue on emissions. So you have the stick and the carrots, but to pay the carrots you need the stick. But this gives time to negotiate the strength of the stick, so to speak. And this is pretty much what I wanted to say. There are some criticism to this, but it's the same as carbon price. With the price, you don't have a cap on emissions, obviously. You don't know, well, you fix the price, but not the quantity. There are all the MRV problem as well. How you appraise emission reduction, you need a baseline to appraise it, and there are many controversies on the methodology. And maybe the main barrier, and this is very often discussed at the COP, the UNFCCC has no mandate on financial and monetary agenda, and when we are talking about tax, when we are talking about finance, we go outside the perimeter of UNFCCC, so we need to bring finance minister to the G20, the IMF on board, and but this, well, so far UNFCCC has no mandate on this topic, and it is one of the limits why the carbon pricing issue is not at the core of the discussion here at COP. Well, it's a bit a paradox. Carbon price is in the mouth of everybody, except in the mouth of negotiators. It's like a taboo because, well, UNFCCC have no mandate, direct mandate on this. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Baptiste. That was really interesting. First hearing about the difficult road for the French to implement the current carbon tax, which is going to increase quite a lot. And then, how positive carbon pricing can also be different view of how you look at carbon pricing instead of just looking at it as a cost. So now we go to Jan-Willem Beukers, who will tell us a bit about how carbon pricing is seen from the people that directly affects, so the businesses. So please welcome him on carbon pricing means in everyday life from a business perspective.
Good afternoon, my name is Jan-Willem Beukers. I work for Eneco. One second. Okay. I work for Eneco, a Dutch utility, medium-sized. I will not talk too much about the company, but we have started in 2007 a green path in which we decided to implement all measures to become the greenest company in the Netherlands. And we started with several actions. I mean, this is an overview, just to get an impression. But we started with the green strategy, sustainable strategy. We started building wind farms. We became partner with the WWF. We decided, we saw that our customers were always choosing between, they could choose between grey and green power. Well, we saw that growth going so slow that we decided for them to make it all green and renewable. And we continue this path for the coming years. And we have been recognized in the market for that. Maybe to explain a little bit how we started. As a company ourselves, we like to set example. And I'm talking, in this case, I'm in carbon trading, but I talk about the voluntary market mostly. I like that market a lot. It's a very honest market. I think people come to the conclusion, the decision they want to do something, and they do something. And it all starts with the insights and then the reduction of the consumption. For example, we had a new head office, a new building. We have lower emission cars or electric cars in our parking now. We put solar panels on our building, but now also in the plots around it. We have underground heat and cold storage. And then you come to the last part, and that's again my business again, because I'm not an advisor on how to save energy, although I believe that's very important. Compensation. And what we do as a trading desk is we invest and we source credits from projects all over the world that contribute to mitigation, and also more and more important, we look at all the co-benefits those projects give. As my neighbor Baptiste said, you know, CO2 reduction creates value. To give a very simple example, we have on a daily basis we have companies that come to us with the questions on how to be more climate friendly or efficient. And last year we had a nice example. This could also have been a business. I'm sorry, the slide just mixed up a little bit. But this was the world of the Dutch Hockey Federation that came to us and said, well, we want to organize an event and we want to do something special that has not done before. And we discussed with them, and then we came to this path in which I followed the light blue path. We made a footprint estimation with them. Then we looked on how to reduce it by using renewable power for the hockey stadium, not using a daily paper, recycle all the plastics that were used in the bottles, and then after the whole event took place, we calculated the actual footprint, in this case 5,000 tons of CO2. This was also including all the transport of people going and coming to the event, which was actually, I thought it was a very difficult question, but it happened that we had a database with all the aerial codes of people, and then it was just having a small questionnaire with, do you come by train, by car, or by bicycle for people living nearby. In the same time, we looked at our project portfolio, and we looked at projects that that the Hockey Federation would like, and in the end we choose a gold standard Koekstad project, and we cancel those credits. So that's a way of making an event carbon neutral in a way where you cannot make even more carbon neutral in the Netherlands, but you can do something, you can take action somewhere else in the world, and we did together with them. So, why should businesses care about carbon pricing or climate action? And I like to stay at the positive side, because the compliance market is all about you have to. What we see is that businesses that become active in this field, they stand out positively. They get named in the press more often. On the other hand, there's also in tenders or there's more requests. Before other companies, contracting companies, they will ask, what do you do about climate? What is your footprint? So it becomes more actual. We see companies that innovate more. It becomes, in our company, it's a good example, it became a way of life. Our CEO started in 2007 with this message, and we thought, well, it's funny to be green. But now everybody thinks in how to reduce and how to be more efficient, and it has become like a game within the company. And also we try to have our customers also get this enthusiasm from us and follow us in this way. There's also a serious part for investors. They look at the exposure companies might have compared to other companies when they invest. So a company with a huge exposure to CO2 or emissions, well, it's less favored to be invested in than a company that has a more, let's say, clean footprint. Proud employees, and I put a little green example of a company in the Netherlands, Jules, who had a campaign internally which was like, a good idea is a green idea, or a green idea is a good idea. They motivated their people, and we used a Casigao RED project with it, and they collected over 200 ideas from their people. 50 could be implemented directly, and well, it was all about awareness creation, and they have now an incredible office. They have a 12-volt network, and they have, well, they did everything that's possible, and that's very good to see. And then the last one, and I think CO2 creates value. I mean, it's the CSR part of it. We promote employment around the world. We transfer technology. Healthcare issues are addressed, and that's why I think this carbon pricing and companies that do it voluntarily are great, and I would like to leave you with that.
All right, thank you. So that was a good story of how businesses should not only see carbon pricing in a negative way, but it could also be like a positive thing to businesses, how they could actually create business from it, and even attract more investors. If they're greener, then they have less risk of being exposed to carbon pricing or these carbon costs that might be imposed on them through different carbon pricing mechanisms. So now we'll move to presentation of Mr. Gilbert on how carbon pricing affects the society. Please welcome.
Okay. Can you hear me? Yeah, okay. Sorry, I prefer to stand up because I'm a bit of a high energy person, and if I'm sitting down when I'm talking, it's not a very good idea. Okay. So, I'm Elisa. I work at a university, Imperial College in London, but I'm on the stage today because I've worked on carbon pricing as a policy expert for over 10 years. So I have quite a good understanding of carbon pricing. So hopefully I can share some of that with you today. Also, my actual job at Imperial College is the head of policy and translation. And translation doesn't mean that I'm a polyglot. It means that I try and explain things to policymakers that universities are doing, quite technical things, to make sure that they can actually have an impact on policy. So in that way, I'm going to be showing you the real stuff, but trying to share it with you in a way that you can engage with us and ask us questions, and I hope that you'll do so. And finally, one little caveat, which is I'm not an economist. We talk about this a lot. We have an economist on the stage, I believe, right? So you can ask him the real economics questions. I'm a bit of an economist by practice, and I hope that many of you have embraced economics in that kind of way as well. Because at the end of the day, carbon pricing is about using economic tools in people's everyday life, and I want to help you understand why that is and how that is. So this is what I want to cover. First of all, why is this discussion important, and why is it important to be having right now in Paris while the negotiations are going on? Second of all, I want to take you to the basics and show you something to do with economics to make you think about how carbon pricing should be influencing society and should be influencing each one of you, or not, for you to consider. And then I'm going to give you a couple of options, talk about why it is or why it isn't, and then talk a little bit about diversity in societies, rather than just one concept of society. So first of all, why is this discussion important? Baptiste alluded to it earlier. If you walk across the road or through this really long pathway and you go to where all the negotiators are, and you speak to pretty much anyone speaking loudly about what is needed, you'll hear people saying we should have a carbon price. And people keep talking about carbon pricing, and they've been talking about it so much these past few weeks that I started to feel, and I'm an expert on the subject, that it's a bit boring and meaningless. So we're here to make it a bit more meaningful. You know, it starts to feel like a panacea. Everything could be perfect if only we had a carbon price. And yes, we can achieve 2 degrees C, if only we had a carbon price. So, you know, what does that really mean? The people who are talking about it are people like the Carbon Pricing Leadership Coalition, which is a World Bank group made up of international government leaders, but also representatives from companies, and it's funded by NGOs. So that's quite a big group of people talking about carbon pricing. I was also at a World Business Council for Sustainable Development event this morning, and they were talking about R&D, and then what came out but carbon pricing. And every single company in the room was talking about carbon pricing. Apparently, Elon Musk was here in Paris this week, and he spoke for 60 seconds, and 50 seconds of that, apparently, this is hearsay, was about his experience in Paris as a child, and 10 seconds was, we just need a price on carbon. Okay, so we need to be talking about it in this room, because the carbon price might be considered the solution, and therefore it has to mean something to people on the ground. But what does it mean? Aha, the mystery. So, now we're at the economics basic bit. How many of you have ever seen a picture like this before? Show of hands. Okay, you don't have to be embarrassed. Just because I said I wasn't an economist doesn't mean that there's a problem with the graph. Okay, but still, it's a minority of people in the room, so if you bear with me while I explain a little bit what this graph shows. This graph is a type of graph used quite commonly, let's say over the last 15 years, in policy circles to try and understand what people can actually do to reduce emissions in an economy. And the way it works is, you think about the things that you can do in your country, let's say France, because we're in France, and you think about how much it will cost to do that. So you might have some things that are quite cheap. So energy efficiency in your house is actually quite cheap. In fact, if you put insulation in your house, particularly in your roof, and you didn't have insulation before, then you can save yourself so much energy that over the lifetime, it actually makes you money, over the lifetime of that insulation. So in fact, that's negative. It's a negative cost that you see. Let's say you want to do something like an offshore wind farm, which is, you know, possible in France. You have some shores. So let's say you wanted to build an offshore wind farm. That is a little bit more expensive than putting insulation in your roof, right? So that means that that's a net larger cost for the same amount of emission reduction. So it makes sense to say, all right, we have a whole list of things we could do. Let's just put them in cost order. Let's start off by doing the stuff that makes us money and finish off by doing the stuff that's most expensive. And that's in fact all that this graph shows. The line on the left-hand side shows you how expensive it is to do something that reduces carbon. And it shows you that price in euro per ton of carbon. You start off on the left-hand side by indicating measures and things that you can do that are free for you or even save you money. So the ones that are negative costs start on the left, and then you go across, and when you pass the bar in the middle, you start to spend money. And when you get to the right-hand side, you start to spend a lot of money. Okay? So then the question is, why are we talking about carbon pricing? Well, for each of these measures that you take, there's actually no accounting for the fact that carbon is bad for the environment. Okay? Now, if you were to take into account not just the financial cost, but the cost to the environment, then the apparent price, the price that you see, would change. Yeah? So the price would actually appear to be less expensive on the right, and in fact even more savings on the left. So you're adding in an incentive, a financial incentive for doing things. Okay, so now looking at this graph again, you can see that there are three circles of areas. If you have a carbon price, it shouldn't change anything on the pink side. Because the stuff on the pink side is better than free. Right? We should be doing this anyway. We're not, and that's for a separate discussion. Maybe Long can organize a discussion around energy efficiency later on. But we're not talking about that now. Those things are so cheap that they're better than free. So carbon pricing is irrelevant for our discussion. The stuff on the right is actually really quite expensive. So a carbon price could help there. But for a carbon price to make those things cheap enough to be attractive, you would need an extremely high carbon price. So okay, we're not looking at the green side either. So we are looking at the middle area. And we're saying there's a whole load of things that we could be doing that at the moment cost us some money, but if we just made it that little bit more attractive, then we'd make some decisions. Okay, so this is the basics bit. Now, I've been talking about we, and deliberately not defining who we is in making these decisions about what we're doing to reduce our carbon. That was deliberate, because you could look at this picture and be many different we's. You could be a company, like Jan Willem at the end, and you could say, as a company, what are the many things we can do to reduce emissions, stack them up in order of cost, and then apply a carbon price, and do more of them. You could be a government, like Baptiste, and you could line them all up, and you could say, what are we doing? And then he introduced positive carbon pricing to encourage people to do some of those things. Or you could be you could be us, and you could say, what could I do? What are the things that I could do? And would a carbon price make a difference to some of the decisions that I make? Now, I'm going to ask you a question now. I just told you that all the people across there are talking about carbon pricing, and they're talking about it a lot. Who are they thinking we are? Who do they think we are? Do they think that we are the companies like Jan Willem, and we are the government like Baptiste, and actually it's all their job? We're going to introduce a carbon price, and they, luckily for you and we, are going to do everything, and they're going to do it so well that they're going to enable us to live the perfect low-carbon lifestyle without lifting a finger. Or are we the we? And are they expecting a carbon price to trickle down so far that each and every individual on the planet will make the decisions that make a difference? Okay, so if you think it's the first one, hands up. If you think it's the second one. Okay, you're allowed to be agnostic. That's quite great, actually, that so many of you think the second one. You could be agnostic, because now I'm going to give you an argument for each one, and then we can have a panel discussion with it. All right. So, let's take the first one first of all. Let's assume, actually, that the carbon price is designed for the two of them to do it all. Yeah? Sorry, you didn't realize this was coming. You know. So Long explained to us already that there are lots of different places in the world where there are carbon pricing. And in fact, he also pointed out that many of those carbon pricing systems exist in the kind of sectors that, you know, affect businesses, not us. In fact, predominantly, carbon pricing systems affect industry and power, the first two. Now, a lot of industry, heavy industry, they sell their commodities at set prices agreed around the world, and it's very difficult for them to include a carbon price that they are given. So emissions trading systems charge a company. They don't usually pass that on to the customer. They can't always pass it on to the customer. So in fact, it does become their problem, and they have to start making their operations more efficient. But when you start looking at the list and thinking about it, actually a lot of those things do affect individuals. So now I'm starting to think maybe it isn't just about governments making decisions or companies making decisions. A power company in a liberal electricity market can take their carbon price and can pass it on to all of us in the room. So maybe they are expecting us to make the difference. In carbon tax situations, a lot of carbon taxes are actually on fossil fuels, liquid fossil fuels. That's us in our cars and our trucks. So maybe they are expecting us to make the difference. Also, in Switzerland, the carbon pricing scheme, that's cut out a little bit from one of Long's pictures, the carbon pricing scheme only covers about 38% of emissions. And of the carbon pricing systems in the world, the highest coverage is in California at 80%. But that's not quite 100%, so it's not all of them. Some of it is us. Let's go back to the idea that it should be a lot of action by businesses, that the carbon price should make businesses and governments create a low carbon infrastructure that helps us make the right decisions. Okay, that's a good idea, but remember that the graph I showed you before showed that the amount of pressure on those companies is really determined by how far the price pushes them to the more expensive options and compensates the more expensive options. And right now, the carbon prices that we see around the world are really low. They're about $10 per ton of CO2. They're not high enough to help put the pressure on companies to really provide us with the infrastructure we need to make it easy for us. So, for option A, I would say that yes, this is part of what carbon price is all about. It's about putting pressure on businesses and governments and encouraging them with a financial signal and an economic signal to provide an infrastructure for a low carbon lifestyle. That's part of it, but the system is not good enough yet. Alright, so option B was that it's all about us, okay? So that a carbon price might be for individual members of society. Alright, now I'm going to tell you a bit of a personal story. Alright, so I have quite a big family. And just a few weeks ago, I'm not making this up actually, just a few weeks ago there was a bit of a crisis. Okay, so imagine I have a few children, I work full time, I like cooking, and our fridge broke. We just went away for the weekend and I came back and like no little green LED. Okay, so of course everything was cooked from the freezer and we ate a lot for like 2 days. And you know, from now on we go to the supermarket every day while we're waiting for a new fridge. So my question to you is, how do you buy a fridge? How do you choose a fridge? Okay, if you're going to choose a fridge, what do you think about? Someone tell me.
Energy Star.
Energy Star, good. Someone else.
Cost.
Cost? Anything else?
Capacity.
Capacity, good. Second hand? Anything else? I should have taken your advice before I bought a fridge. Color, thank you. Right, because the first thing I thought about was how cool is my fridge?
The size.
That's it, it looks nice, right? But then I saw some other ones, and there was that one, and that one. The middle one's pretty boring, right? I really want the one on the left-hand side. But then I realized that there are lots of other aspects to my decision about a fridge. This is, by the way, taken off the internet from the website where I'm planning to buy my fridge from, okay? So this is a real live example. But it's not like a crowd voting thing, so whichever one you choose is not the one I buy, okay? So here are 3 fridges, okay? You can see that the 2 of them are A++, that's the highest rating you can have in the UK for energy efficiency, but one of them is an A+ fridge. Okay, so they look a bit different. In my opinion, the one on the left is by far the coolest fridge. Okay, but now, how big are they? Okay, I have quite a big family. So now I start thinking, oh, it's cool, but it's small. Like, okay, so I could go for a cold fridge that's not so cool, but is actually quite big. So now I'm thinking, okay, middle or right-hand fridge. Then I look at the price. Okay, now cool is definitely out, because cool is £649. Okay, so now we can look at middle and right-hand side. Almost £600 and £300. That's a big difference. Remember, there's not a big difference in size. There is a big difference in energy efficiency, though. The middle one is more energy efficient. Okay, but if we think about what energy efficiency will save me in cost of my electricity bill, because that's where it makes a difference. On the website, when you buy this, they have a lot of information, that's great, and they tell me that this is what the annual cost of running the electricity for my fridge will be. Okay? Okay, of that cost, I did a back of the envelope calculation, which I won't share with you because there's probably some mistakes in it, so I'm not showing you my envelope. But on the back of my envelope, I calculated that of that cost, 5% only is the carbon component. Now, if you look at the decision I'm about to make about a fridge, is there any hope, any way in which the 5% of the small numbers at the top are going to make a difference to the decision I make about my fridge? Okay, now I'm kind of quite a green person, right? So I wanted to. So this is a way of me saying, not that it's unimportant, but when you start to monetize things at the very individual level, and you start thinking about how individual people make decisions, you start to see how difficult it is for carbon pricing to influence individual decisions. There may also, by the way, just in case before someone puts their hand up and tells me, there will also be a carbon cost component in the price of the fridge, because the fridge manufacturer has to pay some carbon price. But I'm telling you, it's not the difference between 598 and 299 pounds. Okay, so you have to pick me up on that one later on. So it's quite difficult to make carbon price as influential as you might want it to be in the decisions that people are making. That's not to say, though, that I don't think it is important for there to be a carbon price component. There's a principle that's been in place, particularly in Europe, for a long time, which is that the polluter should pay. And at the end of the day, we have to recognize that as citizens, we also make decisions that were more or less polluting, and we should pay for that. This is the pay component. It is relatively small, but I think it's still an important signal. Okay, so I won't be much longer. A couple more things. So I did say to you earlier that I would say something about society. So I started off talking to you about carbon pricing in society, but I didn't tell you which society, actually. I just made an assumption that we all kind of knew which society we were talking about. And I didn't talk to you about whom in society. I talked about society as one group. So let's look at those two different issues. First of all, which society? Well, actually, carbon pricing is an excellent mechanism to have in a society that's capitalist and run on economic principles, where electricity is fairly priced and priced competitively. Because then, yes, you should have a price signal about everything quite fairly, because that's how your society works, and that's how people think. But there are plenty of countries right down there negotiating right now who have societies that are structured in a very different way. Where, for example, the predominant way that main commodities are provided are from state-owned enterprises. Prices are controlled. People aren't necessarily used to making decisions on a price-only basis, or used to receiving things rather than making choices. So actually, carbon pricing might not be appropriate for every society. Second of all, I mean, a good example of that actually is in the choice even of carbon pricing approach. In the US, there's been a very long-standing tension between carbon taxes and cap and trade carbon, and that's because taxes are a dirty word in some parts of the world. So the type of society you're in influences the way carbon pricing interacts with you. And then, of course, we should remember that there are people in society who are disadvantaged. There are poorer members of society. And actually putting a price on things is not helpful for those people. So it's more complicated than I even thought when I stood up to start speaking. So finally, on balance, does carbon pricing matter? Does it matter to all of us in the room? So as I said in the introduction, I think it should matter. It should matter to you if you care about climate change, because right now it matters to the policymakers, it matters to the business, and if they're pushing on this, you should know what it's all about. I think it matters because I think it's necessary, but not sufficient. I think a carbon price, and a good, strong carbon price, is important to help businesses and governments deliver us an enabling low-carbon infrastructure, and it's important to send signals to us as citizens, but it's not sufficient. Decision-making is complicated from all of those people at the end who have to make decisions, if they're businesses or if they're citizens. Decision-making is complicated, so there'll always need to be another support structure around to help send signals, provide information, and help people make the decision that's right.